Awesome sauce. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Designing Your Life with Identities in Mind Jam session. We are excited to host our first session, really talking about your story and designing your story, and really thinking critically about what that means for you and how you sharing your story can help you share your experiences and your knowledge and your skill sets with the world. And as we are continuing to think about how we want to be seen and heard by others, and to build our journey forward. We think it's really important to think about creative ways to do that. And today we're excited to talk about how we can do that through music, right? So we're excited to have a few folks with us today to talk about our identities and designing our stories through many aspects. So thinking about music, identity, including race and spirituality, and other things that come along in that conversation. And so we're excited to have Mr. Cologne, our Director of Multicultural Affairs, as well as Maeba Jonas, our Assistant Chaplain in our Religious and Spiritual Life Office, and also Mr. Rawllins, our alum, our artist, our storyteller, the world. And so we're excited to have our folks here together. It's also a mini reunion as well for our folks. And so John, Joe, and Maeba all work together in diversity and inclusion here on Home and Student Affairs at Johns Hopkins a few years back. And we're excited to, just have the conversation. And so with that, we'll just jump right in, and I will start off with a little bit of music to kind of spearhead the conversation, and we'll just go on right there. I'll continue my music share, and here we go. You ready? You ready? All right.
I hear the sound of an army arising. 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 Where's the army of God this morning? Yeah. I hear the sound. Come on. At this place. Sound.
So thank you, thank you, thank you. That is by way of the introduction. I am not going to read you Mr. Rawlins' bio. I think that we can just start the conversation, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and you know, just a little bit about yourself, and if you want to talk a little bit about how you felt doing as you were performing that song, and what that meant to you, and then I think that could start the conversation.
Sure. So I would say afternoon, 'cause I'm over here on the West Coast, so it's still very much the morning. But it's really good to be here with you all. Good to see Joe and Maeba again, and to be part of this conversation. And thank you, of course, to my friend Clifton for the invitation. I guess just a little bit about me. I'm originally from the DC area, so I'm a little far from home at the moment, but enjoying my time out here. I moved to the San Diego, California area just over 15 months ago to start a position as the director of the Black Student Center at California State University, San Marcos. I've been in student affairs for the last almost 15 years now, which is kind of crazy to think. After doing my undergrad at Cornell, jumped right in, and have been in the field ever since. Had the honor and the privilege of working at Hopkins, in the Division of Student Life, or with the Dean of Student Life, as well as in Multicultural Affairs with Joe, which is part of the DNI, so I got to work with Maeba as well. And was a wonderful experience. At the same time, actually, with Joe's great support, I ended up getting my master's in communication from Hopkins, which is where I proudly wear this sweatshirt. And so that's kind of the professional end of my world. But the music end, I would say, it's always been a part of my life. Like some folks, when I was I think just about to turn 2 years old, out of my control, clearly, I joined the choir at my church because my parents said that's what you're going to do. And it's one of those things that has always stuck with me. That was my first exposure to singing, to music. That is where I grew a passion for it. And it wasn't until I got to college, when I got to Cornell, I realized that I could kind of fuel that passion even more. Because, it was more of a side kind of supporting piece of my life. But then, as I was doing some things there, folks started to, engage me around, hey, you want to try this? You want to do this with us? There was a group that was recording. I'll never forget, this was in a residence hall. They wanted to record an album. This was 2002. And so there was a microphone tied to the desk light, tied with a sock. And that's how we recorded. The first album I ever recorded was that, or in that kind of setup. It was hot because it was a small room. But we would be in there literally every night for months working on this. And that's what bit the bug in me to actually do some more writing, some production. So over time, I've been fortunate to be able to do that, to write songs. I've recorded songs. I have songs on, iTunes, Google Play, all those platforms. And then I've also been able to travel with my music, which has been great, and do other things. I did a tour with Wynton Marsalis in 2013. Yes, 2013. And have sung with him for a number of years. Last time I sung with him was last November. I've traveled. In fact, funny enough, I don't know if Joe remembers, when I moved from the student life to multicultural affairs, I started, I think it was a Thursday, and I had to fly to London the next day to go and sing. And I remember telling Joe, I was like, do you sure you want me to start the day before I gotta leave? I don't know how that's gonna work out, but it worked out well, and I appreciated him for the support, And so it's been a big passion of mine. And when I got here, I took a little bit of a break because I wanted to be able to settle into my job, get to know the area. I've never lived on the West Coast before, but I've gotten into my groove, and am singing with a couple of different folks here. Still sing with a group back at home in DC. And I just, even when I was taking that break, which was very intentional, and I thought that I would be able to kind of maybe just not worry about doing music so much or so actively anymore, it didn't last more than 6 months, because that was really like who I feel like that's a major part of who I am, and it's one of my outlets to be able to express my identity, express the things that matter to me, and so that's just a little bit of the journey I've taken. And hi, Cheryl.
Well, thank you for that overview. And, I think it's really awesome that, you found a way, even willingly or unwillingly, to express your identity from a young age to even after you said you wanted to give yourself a break and you're like, yep, I can't get a break because you needed it, right? So I'm wondering if you can talk more about what about being able to express yourself through music provides, I'm imagining if you needed it, there's some support there and some encouragement or whatever, right? What about that is a need for you, and how you're able to express your identity in that way?
So, and that's a good question, Clifton, because, again, for me, I feel like in a way, that is an outlet. It's not my only outlet to express who I am. I get to do that in my work. When you work in diversity and inclusion, you really can't work in this area and not, kind of bring yourself to the work. So that's always really important. But I think that other aspect of me that really kind of, that creativity is kind of what I need to, be able to flow with and let out at certain points. In terms of that support, I mean, that the support is always important. Now, I know that some people may feel like as they're starting in some of these, endeavors creatively, they may not always have the support there. And sometimes that's because, at least for me, I think we sometimes are potentially looking at these certain like standards or these certain measurements that, folks would say, oh, this is what it looks like to be successful in music, or this is what it looks like to have a great career in music, to be loved by other people. But I think, one, you have to embrace your own sound. You have to embrace your own voice. You have to embrace your own story. And once you do that, that is what will connect people to you and to, who you are and what you're singing about. And I think the other aspect of it for me has been when I'm able to talk about that or share that, I think people feel what it really means to me, right? I think about, like I said, Joe, as my supervisor when I was working at Hopkins, was very supportive. And fortunately, every supervisor I have had has been supportive of me. I mean, I got here July of last year. November of 2019, I actually taken on a second directorship in another center, and I still had to go to New York for a week to sing with Marsalis again. And my boss didn't give me any crap for it. She said, "Go, like this is who you are. This is what you need to do." And in fact, when we live streamed, I remember my phone, of course, wasn't with me when I was on the stage, but afterwards, I had text messages from students. Screenshots from my colleagues in the centers that I ran. They were showing the live video and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was so comforting to feel that support and to know that, just as I try in my work to get others to express themselves, to do what feels, great for them, that people support me in that, and that makes the world of difference. And I think, especially now, I think we're in the day and age where I think, people aren't necessarily bound to being in these certain boxes. Like, well, if I'm a professional in student affairs, well, what business would I have kind of doing music over here? Or, what business would I have being in fitness over here? Or, these, in this day and age, you can do so many things. It's really about your own passion, your own desires, and really finding how to balance those things. And when you do find that balance, I think it can be a beautiful thing and really help you to be the best person that you can be, and show that to others that you're working with.
A lot said there. I love it. So just so folks know, this is a conversation, so anyone can jump in. If you have a question or a thought, feel free to do so. This is just to start having a conversation about how our identities, one, matter, and that we can use them to advance ourselves and build our way forward. So feel free to jump in at any time. So with that, anyone have any thoughts, initial thoughts or questions that are in your head? You're like, need to learn more, right?
Yeah, I think that what John said was really important because I feel like, especially in places of, high standard, we feel like there's this rigid success, and that success will bring us this sort of happiness, and that if we fail at what we're doing, we're not good, and maybe we should try something different because we obviously weren't meant for that sphere of life. Like when you look at Google, even, it's, if you search up how to, find success, you find like what, 1,600,000,000 search results. And when you look up how to learn from failure, you find 6 million. So like a third of the search results, because I think that, society today has made failure look like something that we should all be afraid of, instead of something that we can learn from. So yeah, using our identities and finding those fears that, like, it's not going to be easy. I don't think it's ever going to be easy, especially by people who don't, show you the support that you would like. But success comes in many different ways. And like you were saying with your live stream, success to someone could have been, I want 1,000,000 streams. But to you, success was, I want to touch people and have them understand the power that they have and their own identities. And I think that the way we define our success really shows what we can achieve, I guess.
No, I most certainly agree, and I think one of the big things for me, is, like I said, once you get past those notions of success, you actually probably find more success once you define it for yourself, right? What that is, like you said, for me, it's like touching people, sharing that aspect of who I am, and making sure that they then feel like they have the space and the place to express themselves. However, that is the biggest thing. I mean, I used to kind of get on myself a little bit because I thought about the fact that I work in student affairs. I have a degree from Cornell. I have a degree from Hopkins. What does that add up to? Like, some of my friends, when I went on tour, every time someone would see, so like I wear a Cornell t-shirt, and it was like, oh my gosh, you went to Cornell? What? And you're like, no one, because the notion is no one goes to an Ivy League school, no one goes to a top tier school like Hopkins for music, right? And I don't have any degrees in music, so it's not something that I've necessarily learned in the most formal educational sense, but it's something that I've learned over time in many informal spaces, and something that I love. And so for me, that's the most important, right? And again, once you get past the feeling the need to perform in certain ways, that is where the success really comes.
Yeah, just wanted to add to this concept of success, because I think that we've been so, particularly around identities, right? So I always tell folks, consider the norms, because they don't apply to you. And so you have to really engage your identities, be rooted in them. You may not need to know everything about them, but you need to know enough so that you can move in this world in a different way than most people are going to be pigeonholing you in, right? I'm reminded of a book called How to Be Everything to Everyone by Emily Watnick, I think it is. And so she talks about how people view her as like, she's a jack of all trades and a master of none, and people see her in all these modalities, and she's like, they think that she's just a vagabond in the world. She's just like moving in the world, has no direction. But really what she's doing is she's being entrepreneurial in the way that she engages herself, and she's finding herself. Something that vibed with me, John, was actually how we actually get our information. particularly who we are from music and art in general. But, you know, I was reminded of, and I can still smell my mom's cooking in the apartment where we lived in Brooklyn, New York. I'm New Yorican, and I just remember every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if Monday was a holiday, she would have a party with friends over, and they would have salsa merengue and playing all types of stuff. And they had hidden messages, and then, you know, we had the living room with like 20 some odd people eating food, and I hadn't realized that I was in a classroom, and I was being taught by folks that weren't in the room, and people that were in the room. And so I was able to find foundation, and particularly I'm Puerto Rican, and there's a huge population in New York of Puerto Ricans, but I was able to really connect with different pieces of my own family, to ask questions, to talk about what a jibaro is, which is a countryman in my country. They got the straw hats. They got what I got on right now, 4 pockets with all decked out. And it's just a rich culture, but then it's also rooted in the African diaspora. So those are things that I take with me as I navigate my identities and how I show up. So music has been huge. I don't even know if I had a room or option to not listen to music and the history from, you know, and again, this is historical, right? We do oral history to maintain it. There's no way that we would know of indigenous cultures if we didn't have some of their music and some of their customs, right? And so that's where I'm rooted in. I put my anchors in as often as I can. And you know, anyone that knows me knows I'm Puerto Rican. And people say, why don't you say you're an American? I was like, that's a given, but my Puerto Rican ancestry trumps a lot of that stuff. And part of it is my nationality is important to me. All the things that go along with it are probably have been part of my social justice, you know, continuation of my own knowledge and history. And I continue to do it to this day. And I'm able to connect with like elders who are salseros, and they're like on the congas, and they're playing music still, and they're like 70, 80 years old. And I'm like, damn, I wish I had picked up my conga. But I didn't. And so I get to live vicariously through them. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because I think that in the way that we move, particularly in this need to be accepted, and particularly in communities and their identities, that may not be options for people. And so to find yourself in a space that really is comforting, even with people who may be different than you, right? Even within your own identities, to find that linkage, to find those opportunities, they'll catapult you successfully across the board, you know? And so whether it's in the workspace or in hanging out with, you know, with Marsalis and just, you know, really doing the things that you love. You know, John, you know, I appreciate the shout out, but really he did a lot of work, introspective work while he was here. And the fact is he could do all those things, and the opportunity for him to be him, you know, I wanted him to do that, because I think as a professional, you have to be allowed to kind of engage that work, even at work. That makes it so much more. That's how you retain people. That's how you keep people happy. That's how you get people involved. And that's how you really get to talk about the things that matter, especially when we have social justice movements happening in the world. So we can talk about what it is to be, you know, racism, you know, racist or gendered issues, or even LGBTQ issues. We could do all that because we have it in our own space, and we could talk about it more intimately.
Yeah, that's dope. It also reminds me of even on Monday with Dr. Seymour talking about how the heritage of indigenous people, right? And how people might know, but there are certain aspects of indigenous people that are going away, right? So like you were talking about the Congos, right? And so thinking about how people are creating and what that looks like, and the heritage, how it continues or not, right? How do we continue to push that forward? And so, you know, it's interesting as well. And even thinking about the spiritual aspect of, you know, what music does for people, right? In so many aspects. And one of the cool facts that I learned on Monday with Dr. Seymour was that, our native folk and our indigenous folks are oftentimes more religious than what we think of religion, right? And so it was really interesting to think about that and feel that religion really hurt our indigenous people. And so it's like mind-boggling that is a thing that happens. And so really to see how religion or spirituality through music is something that is dynamic to say, for lack of a better word right now. And so how it does hurt, but also help people, right? And so how do we think about that as we move forward? Like for me personally, like music helps me to get through tough times, whether or not I'm singing it or if I'm actually just listening to it, right? So I'm wondering about that aspect. How do we think music helps us continue our journey forward, especially when they're oftentimes religiously based or even racially based, right? It's just a thought I have out there right now.
Maeba, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I love this conversation. I think it's so important, and the intersection between the two. I think, John, I love how you told the story about starting in your church choir. I think so many folks are told when they're very young, unfortunately, that they are not able to sing, that they're not creative, that they aren't talented enough, right? And all of that can squash the creative spirit, right? When music and singing and creativity are about so much more than that, right? It's about culture and community and amplifying voices. I mean, Joe, you're talking about oral history, and it's really actually fascinating when you study religion. Oral histories that are sung are actually, and oral histories in general, right? They are often sung so that people can remember them, so that those stories can be passed down. The hymns, the chants, right? The legends are often are put to music, right? Are set to music so that they can be passed down. And it's actually an interesting fact that oral histories are more accurate, that they stay the same throughout time longer than written histories. So we think of, nowadays, once we were able to write things down, once with the invention of, papyrus and things like that, then we didn't, the truth was we didn't have to remember it anymore, right? And then things got changed and they got transcribed wrong. And that, generations of just knowing, right, in your voice, in your body, in your soul, in your community, the stories of the culture started to fade. And so I just loved hearing you talk about it. I'd love to hear you talk about more, what was it like for you growing up, being, connected to music in that way and being connected to community. I just love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because that was true for me as well.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because I think, so I'll even back up a step further. And it's funny because I often now think about it more than I did then. So my parents met in a choir. They both sung in this choir, and they're not, singers or they don't consider themselves true singers. Like they haven't sung in forever. But they met in this choir. And my mother often talks about how they would interact in the rehearsals and things like that. So I feel like, clearly there was this opening of music in my life. That's how I got here. So when I was young in the choir, I just remember, clearly I always tell people, I think for some reason I remember things that happened from age 7 on. Anything before that, I don't know what happened. But what I remember is just this kind of excitement getting to go back into that space. It was every other Saturday, and then we sang at the end of the month, right? So it was exciting for me to be in this space, to learn notes, learn parts. That's how I developed my ears for harmony, and things that I think I probably paid attention more than most other people in the group. And there were a whole lot of us in the group. But it was exciting for me, and so much so that as I got older, I remember in middle school, I I say that middle school is a very, very awkward time for most kids. I don't know what I was doing in middle school, but it was not that I was supposed to be doing. So I remember my parents getting called to the school, having a parent-teacher conference with all my teachers around this table, and they're talking about how bad I'm being in class and what I'm not doing and all this other stuff. And I remember going to my locker, and my parents are there, and they said, we're really disappointed in you. This is not who, you are supposed to be, or, you need to do better in class. School is important. And so you're on punishment. And I was kind of like, okay, like I sure. And then they said, and you're not participating in the choir conference next week. And I bawled. Like, that was the punishment. That I didn't care about being on punishment. When they said you couldn't participate in this conference, I was upset. And so, thinking about that now, it's like, that is how much music meant to me, and having those opportunities to be in that space. And even, like I said, even as a child, it was like, okay, yes, there's school, and I sung in chorus in elementary school, but that was it. So I basically, for the most part, a lot of my music, or a lot of the singing aspect of music for me was outside of school. But I did participate in band, which taught me some other things, right? And developed my ear in other ways. And it's funny. So the group that I grew up in, called the Junior Voices of Calvary, I sung with them from like right before I turned 2 until I turned 13. And then I was 30 or 31 when I got back to, I was 30 when I got back to the area, and went right back to my home church, and they asked me to be in charge and to direct that group. And so I directed them for about 3-4 years, and it was, for me, it was just so important to make sure that what I had, what I felt like influenced me, was given to them. Right, was given to this 120 children choir, and to really be able to allow them, and really it's not just, you all have to love singing and you have to, then grow up to do, to be singers or be artists. For me, it was allowing them to find their passions, their creativity, no matter what that was, and being able to help, foster that through this avenue, and so it's funny that I was able to experience that as a child, and then to go back and to give it to literally the same group, so many years later, and then to go back to the other piece, really that connection with spirituality. For me, there's a very different experience when I'm zoned in to, that singing gospel music. Like I've written R&B, I've written pop stuff, I've done hip hop stuff, but the majority of my life has been around gospel and spiritual music. And so for me, when I'm able to kind of zone in on that, it's a whole other feeling that, I get, where for me, there's a freedom there that I don't just generally experience in my day-to-day. Not to say I don't feel, free in my day-to-day, but it's just a different feeling, right? That was, I think, one of the most invigorating aspects about going on tour, because I had never been on a tour. I never thought I would go on a tour. But then doing this tour where you're literally singing every single night, and that's all you're doing, right? So I had a month off of work. They didn't make me really take anything from work to check in or do anything. They were like, go do your thing. And so to literally go to sleep, wake up, sing, get on a bus, they take you to a new city, go to sleep, get up, sing. To do that over and over and over again, I initially thought, I'm probably gonna get sick of this at some point, but I never did. And I think it's just because that connection in music and the tour specifically, it was really kind of a hybrid of spiritual and gospel music, but jazz and classical as well. If you know Wynton Marsalis, he's a genius. And so, had all of that stuff mixed in there, and literally every single night that we would sing, it felt like a new experience, right? And so much so when we've done the show a few times since the tour, And even though it's not like I'm studying the same music over and over again, in 2013 I learned it and I could sing it with, you know, precision and clarity in 2019, right? And it because there's that feeling. It does stay with you. You talk about that oral history piece. That stuff stays with you, right? And it's even comes back to you, you know, sometimes when you need it most. And I think that is the other thing about, at least for me, music, and I would say creativity and arts, period. But for me, with music, that recall, right? Depending on where I am and what's going on, I probably can recall things much clearer with musical context around them. It's very strange, but I think about sophomore year of college, the fall. I remember I was living in a single in my residence hall, and I remember a lot because Alicia Keys' Diary of Alicia Keys was dropping, and that's when Alicia Keys was like, you know, one of the biggest, I mean, she still is, but yeah, one of the biggest names in music. I remember I volunteered amongst my group of friends to skip class that day so I could go and buy all the copies for us to all enjoy. You know, so I went to the mall instead of going to class. But I remember literally how the air felt. I remember kind of what the season looked like. I remember, you know, my friends and I literally, in the excitement that we had around that music, the non-excitement we had around classes at that point. But I remember all that stuff in the context of music, right? And you know, music is that universal language. So it can speak to every emotion. It can speak to every situation. And it really does bring us all together in ways that other things just don't, right? Even listening to music from artists that are, you know, singing in another language, you may not necessarily understand the language itself, so that, you know, may not understand the words or the lyrics, but you can hear and feel the emotion of what they're saying, and then start to potentially get the gist just through that listening and those sounds. That soundscape is so important, and so for me, it all connects back. That's why when I was on campus as a student, I always had headphones on, you know, and if you need to get my attention, you just hope I was looking up, because I was always listening to music. I have music on when I've been working from home since March, right? I have music on all the time when I do my programs at the institution. I did an event in June after the murder of George Floyd. I did a large community conversation. We had about 450 people there. I played music in the beginning and music at the end. I played music in the beginning because I believed that was going to help to center the conversation and center the space. So no matter what you were doing before or where you were coming from, it kind of got you in the place of, this is a serious conversation, and, you know, we're talking about some deep things. And at the end, playing music that was somewhat empowering to say, you know, we're going through this, but I need to think through what's my aspect of advocacy and activism in this situation? How can I use my privilege to enact change in my community and hopefully let that spread throughout, right? Again, for me, that music tie can always exist, and I think it's one of the most powerful things that we have in terms of culture, and the way that it expresses culture. Like Joe, you said, it teaches culture. And then even for those of us who are, you know, spiritual or, you know, observe spiritual practices, that connection is so deep, I think, when we think about music and spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a meme recently, and I'm sorry I don't have the reference, but it said something like, if art is how we decorate space, then music is how we decorate time. Right? And it just like hit me like, yeah, like what if we live our life in that place of creativity, that place of like what I call the spirit, right? It's just a deeper connection to one another, and to you know, for me, like the divine. Yeah. Hmm. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I'm Tim. I came late. Sorry, I came like 45 minutes late. um, but yeah, I can, speak to that as like music just being part of like my upbringing. Like, we would like have dinner, like do dishes, and then just like put on Earth, Wind and Fire and just like dance like through all of dishes. Um, and now it's just like, Alexa, play this, play that, it's like, because it's just like in the corner, it's so easy to, and then you can like go and like turn it down if you don't like the song, or like say, Alexa, shut up. So yeah, I definitely resonate with the last 5 minutes of the conversation. But
Tim, thank you for sharing that, because I was actually just had a conversation. So if you don't, if you want to take the leap into time, definitely get yourself a record player and get some records on wax. And literally, there is no other sound like that. I tell students all the time, yeah, sure, 8 tracks, they limited you. CDs, it's too crisp. You need something that feels like there actually is there's an orchestra in there and they're playing just for you. So buy yourself something that is a record player, get some records from like a used vinyl place, and it will take you into a whole different spiritual encounter, really, to be honest with you. I think about, I stole actually, well, not still, but I took my mom's records. She didn't know about it, but I took them because I knew that she would either throw them out, and I was like, no, and I ended up investing in a record player. And I play that in the background all day, every day. And sometimes I get up and start dancing. Sometimes I'm melancholy, but that's all part of the cultural experience, right? And even in trauma, there are things that are therapeutic for us spiritually that music allows us to, get into a little bit differently. And it's a healing thing, and it helps you metamorphosize and hopefully come out of it a little bit healed, a little bit better. So definitely invest in that record player.
yeah, and it brings back the idea of like listening to albums, in total, because people right now are just like, oh yeah, like listen to that one song, the rest of the album was bad. Like there's some skits, you know what I mean? Like I don't want to listen to people talking, but then you like actually listen to it. Like this new album by Odyssey, Odd Cure, it just came out, and like the skits he talks about with his family, just like talk about like it's like Baba skit, like Mama skit. Like it just talks about like the relationship, because like, oh, it's like you should like talk about like Baltimore City rappers and like make a documentary about that. That's what like his mom was saying in the skit. And like if you just skip that, you wouldn't even know that. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna on Facebook Marketplace, they sell some cheap record players, and people just like want to listen to it on the go, so they don't really have a use for it anymore. But yeah, I definitely resonate. I will definitely be investing in one soon. I've always wanted one, and my sister has some, but my uncle gave us some vinyls, and they're all like Genesis and like shit I don't really listen to, stuff I don't really listen to, so it's like, yeah. But
Well, definitely, if you're in Baltimore, there's a space called Soundgarden, and they have things that are on sale. And hopefully you get to pick up your Prince Purple Rain album.
Yeah, I actually got a record player for Christmas last year, so I have to start getting more records. I was sad when they closed down on us, but then I had started building up my collection. But it does help when you actually need that moment. I actually bought a Beethoven, I think Fifth Symphony, and it is very old, and so you have to really turn it all the way up so you can listen to the music. But it feels different, right? And so I think that is helpful to really think about, like, how do we help ourselves? And I'm glad you mentioned trauma. I know we only have a few more minutes left, but thinking about like our world today and how we are going into spaces, whether or not during school or professional spaces, et cetera, how are we able to actually continue to tell our story and or shift the environment in those spaces? So, I think that is a question I have, of thinking about how might we continue to, showcase our identities in those spaces, either through music or some other creative ways, even on LinkedIn, right? How do we make sure people know who we are and how we actually present ourselves and what benefit that is? So that's a broad question for, everyone to chime in.
Go, Joe.
I would, real quick. So one of the things that I thought about, particularly at this area, is journaling has been saving grace for me, and it actually has provided me kind of a contemplative way to go back and kind of evaluate my thoughts, and I write comments after 6 months and say, what was I thinking, or this is where I'm at. And I actually schedule that so that way I can always come back to it and not forget it, which is interesting because sometimes you journal and you just forget it and you read it when you feel depressed or if you feel like you want to go back into time. But I actually schedule it. And some of my friends, that they end up doing is they post some of their pieces up online. They create their own sayings and whatnot, or even give a snapshot of their lives. But I think that the journaling has been one of the most amazing pieces because it translates, right? It's a language can really go into music, right? Sometimes I might sing my lyrics. I might need John to help me out with the background music and the vocals or something. But ultimately, I have my music. I have my template there. So that's my offering for today.
Yeah, and I think just like writing in general, like I wrote, like we had a class in high school called Identity, and I wrote about A Tribe Called Quest and how like it helped form my identity in high school. And then like for another research project for like AP Euro, I wrote about Miles Davis and the civil rights movement. And then, it's just kind of cool how it can like tell that story, and it's like perfectly, well, not, and in a lot of ways it's matched up with what's happening in that time. So yeah, I definitely agree. Writing is, a really good reflective tool.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've tried to just journal, like just I can't do it. I don't know what it is. I can't do that. But what I've found is really my songwriting is my journaling, right? And so being able to kind of go through it and do it, it's not necessarily as, me just kind of putting thoughts to paper, but it's still putting thoughts to paper, but it's kind of that lyrical, content and what's going to rhyme and how do I want to say it here? How do I want to express it? And I kind of, the way my process works, I'm kind of producing as I'm writing, right? So I'm thinking about how it sounds or how I want to say it, and my phone is full of voice notes with all that stuff on it, right? And so that for me is that piece. I also think just in terms of talking about trauma, if it's your own music or it's somebody else's, it really can help you to, it can help you to think through things, maybe think and see things a little differently than how you may be seeing them in the moment. I have a couple of different playlists that I utilize at different points. I actually have one, and I laugh when I talk about it, but I actually do use it. Every once in a while, I have what I call this good cry that's like right here, and it won't come up. Like it just won't ever come up. And I'm just like, I feel like I need to release this. And I put on my cry playlist. The one tear comes down, and the rest is history, right? And because for me, it's like there's clearly something in there that needs to come out. And so I need music to help me to do that. And it can evoke those emotions. And so I think music is, and sometimes music can actually be the thing that helps you to really, in some ways, like look at what your trauma actually is, or look at what you're going through, then to be able to think about, okay, so how do I shift away from this, right? Or how do I begin to heal from this? Because it's one thing to experience it and live in it, but then to kind of see it, a little bit further back at a new perspective, and then to say, okay, all right, so this is where I am, this is what I'm dealing with. How do I, the first song I ever commercially released came from an actual time where I was journaling because I was experiencing some things, and then my friend was like, hey, see what you can do with this track. And I'm listening to the track, I'm looking at what I journaled about. I said, this, okay, kind of goes together here, and that first song. And I think it's funny how people still bring it up every once in a while. Someone will call me or text me like, hey, this came on, I needed this, or I was going through this and I needed to hear your song because. And for me, again, that goes back to my hope is that someone hears it and they're touched by it or encouraged in a way that it will help them. And so this particular song where it's like I'm going through these things, and I wrote it the way I wrote it, so what didn't sound first person. I wrote it like other people are dealing with these things, but clearly it was me. And so, but it was kind of then this kind of air of hope and how I pulled through, how I pushed out of it. And then the spiritual aspect really for me was, asking God to help me to, get out of where I felt like I was at that time. It's so powerful. It really can help. Again, trauma, you think about celebration, right? When I want to, I'm happy about something, I'll turn some music on. Like you said, Joe, I may get up and dance and act a fool. When I'm getting, before Rona happened, it's like I'm getting ready to go out. I want to feel good, so I'm just gonna play this list. It's so for me it is my escape, it's my release, and it is something that also fuels me.
Thank you so much.
I love that. I know we're about out of time. I just want to add, so for me it's preaching. I find that to do that, I need some sort of scripture, whether that's a poem, whether it's a hymn, whether it's some kind of inspiration, and then to sit with that, to meditate on it, right? Even if it's just a phrase, sometimes I can preach on one word, right? But that, speaking to that inspiration has been a lifeline for me. And especially now, right, we can't go into our worship services, we can't be with our community, we can't hear, or feel that sense of singing all together. And who knows when that's going to happen again, right? So I wanted to share one of my favorite hymns, and I'll just share one verse, but I thought it spoke to this moment, and it's called "How Can I Keep from Singing?" I'm not going to sing it, but I'll read the first verse, right? It's a song about lamentation. It's about how things, come up in the world. And right now we're living through this moment that's just so challenging. And there are so many ways in which we're being stretched and pulled and having a reckoning, really, I think, in our country around identity, around racism, around, democracy, on who we are. And anyway, so the first verse of this hymn says, "My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the sweet, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It finds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing?" And this is a song that's played in my ordination, so it always gets me a little choked up. But it goes on to talk about all of the things that can be difficult, and a response to that actually can be finding joy in singing, finding, like you said, John, finding the release, right, in that connection in the music. So I just love what you share here today. Thanks.
Well, thank you all so much. I really enjoyed learning a lot and also just having a conversation about how we can really think differently about how we tell our stories. We do it all the time, right? And it's just now we have ways that we know that we can do it, right? And so I put some things in the chat, what folks were saying. And I think it's really about how do you continue to tell your story, right? And so as we are exiting, I love this song from our brother, John Rawllins. We'll play a little bit of it as we exit, and if you needed to go off as we continue to jam out, that's fine. But thank you all for joining us today.
Now, did you get royalty fees for this?
I should have asked Joe, because I knew the first time he played, so I saw it in his face. I said, "No, I know it's about to happen."
You can help me say it. Listen, bruised but not broken, cast down but I've never been destroyed. Gone through the fire, it was you that quenched my burning soul. Your presence is my desire. And more of you shall I seek after. Nothing else can satisfy me. Nothing else can fill me like you. Nothing else can satisfy me. Oh Lord, say, fill me once again. Nothing else can satisfy me. Nothing else can fill me like you. Say, nothing else can satisfy me. Oh Lord, fill me. Come on, let me hear you say more.
All right, I'll let you all jam onto that song later in your time. It gets better. I love this song. And like John said, sometimes music just hits you in the right moment. And it's random. I have that song in a few of my playlists on my phone. And when it comes, I was like, this is my boy John. So definitely take advantage of listening to that and or get it all on platforms all around. But thank you all again. And we are excited to have had this conversation. And I hope that we continue the convo.